Hello! Welcome to English for Shared. Here, you learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's go!
The worst year of each century. I invite you to take a journey through the past to uncover the worst year of each century. Buckle up and let's travel together toward knowledge. First century, year 79 AD. Imagine living an ordinary life in southern Italy when suddenly the sky darkens, and without warning, Mount Vesuvius, a giant volcano, explodes with a force even the Roman gods couldn't predict. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum are buried alive under a rain of ash, molten rock, and toxic gases. The smoke cloud rose 33 kilometers into the sky and dumped 1.5 million tons of rock per second. It was like 100,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs exploding all at once. Thousands of people simply vanished, swallowed by waves of fire and molten lava. An apocalyptic end, forever marked in history. Second century, year 165 AD. The war ends, soldiers return home, and bring with them something no one expected: a deadly disease. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox or measles, spreads across the Roman Empire like a silent ghost. Between 5 and 10 million people die. Cities are left empty. The army collapses. Trade with India and Southeast Asia breaks down. And with war raging in the East, the empire sinks deeper into crisis. It was as if everything was falling apart at once: health, economy, and peace. Third century, year 251 AD. The plague of Cyprian hits Rome like an endless nightmare. Up to 5,000 people die every day. Alexandria, one of the largest cities in the world, sees its population drop from 500,000 to under 200,000. The disease could have been smallpox, measles, or even a hemorrhagic fever. Farmlands are abandoned. Food becomes scarce. The army weakens. The empire is collapsing. Emperor Decius tries to appease the gods with sacrifices, but those who refuse, like the Christians, are persecuted. It was fear trying to overpower faith. Fourth century, year 365 AD. The earth trembles with a devastating earthquake near Crete. The sea recedes, and then a giant wave swallows everything. A tsunami hits Alexandria, killing tens of thousands. In a single day, coastal cities disappear from the map. Ships are tossed like toys. Survivors are left without food, water, or shelter. Meanwhile, the Huns, fierce warriors from the Central Asian steppes, begin their invasions. They push other tribes like the Goths directly against the Roman Empire. The chaos grows so intense that in 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Goths destroy the Roman army and even kill Emperor Valens. That's when the empire started to die from the inside out. Fifth century, year 410 AD. For the first time in 800 years, Rome, the Eternal City, is invaded by a foreign enemy, the Visigoths. Led by Alaric, they loot everything, kill, destroy, and steal. The whole world watches in shock. Rome is no longer invincible. It's a direct blow to the heart of the West. And as if that weren't enough, in 451, Attila, the feared leader of the Huns, invades Gaul, leaving a trail of destruction in his path. The empire is staggering, surrounded on all sides, and on the brink of collapse. 6th century, year 536 AD. Many historians call this the worst year to be alive. Volcanoes around the world erupt. A thick, dark cloud covers the sky. The sun disappears for 18 months. The world plunges into a cold darkness. It snows in summer. Crops fail. Famine spreads. Economies collapse. And as if it were a curse, a few years later comes the plague of Justinian, a pandemic that kills 1/3 of the Byzantine Empire's population. It was as if the earth itself had gone into apocalyptic mode. 7th century, year 664 AD. The Yellow Plague hits Britain and Ireland, destroying entire monasteries that were centers of knowledge, faith, and refuge. Even though it didn't kill as many people as other pandemics, the cultural loss was immense. Books, stories, leaders, religious figures, all gone. And earlier in the century, in 632, the prophet Muhammad dies. Without his leadership, a series of internal wars breaks out in the Islamic world. The Ridda Wars spark revolts and conflict across the Arabian Peninsula, a delicate moment that forever changed the path of a rising faith. 8th century, year 750 AD. The Islamic world erupts. The Abbasid revolution begins with the goal of overthrowing the Umayyads, who had ruled until then. The Battle of the Zab River marks the beginning of the end. The Umayyad Caliphate is destroyed, and almost their entire family is executed. What followed was chaos. Civil wars, bloody purges, and internal disputes. A new caliphate arose, but the price was far too high. 9th century, year 865 AD. England is invaded, not just by any army, but by a brutal alliance, the Great Heathen Army. They weren't there just to loot and leave. They wanted to conquer everything. The sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless, lead the charge with blood in their eyes. In 14 years of war, the Vikings burn villages, destroy kingdoms, plunder churches, and spread fear everywhere. Entire kingdoms fall. English stability turns to dust. It was the end of one era and the beginning of a much darker one. 10th century, year 907 AD. The mighty Tang dynasty, a pillar of Chinese civilization for centuries, collapses. With the empire shattered, China plunges into a period of pure instability known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms. It was chaos. The economy crumbles, trade routes are disrupted, crops are looted or burned, famine becomes routine. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, the Abbasid Caliphate weakens. Central power dissolves, and local conflicts erupt across multiple regions. In Europe, the Vikings are still leaving their trail of destruction, relentlessly attacking the British Isles, Ireland, and northern France, keeping the continent in a constant state of tension. 11th century, year 1099 AD. The First Crusade reached its bloodiest climax. The siege of Jerusalem followed weeks of starvation, combat, and bombardment. Christian knights managed to breach the city walls. What followed was one of the most brutal massacres of the Middle Ages. Thousands of Muslims and Jews were mercilessly slaughtered. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was turned into a palace, and the Dome of the Rock became a Christian shrine. This carnage ignited a flame of hatred that would fuel centuries of religious wars between Christians and Muslims. Meanwhile, famine and disease ravaged parts of Europe, worsened by weak harvests and ongoing wars. The Byzantine Empire faced invasions by the Pechenegs. In the Iberian Peninsula, Christian kingdoms from the north fought Muslims, while in England, the aftermath of the Norman conquest still caused rebellions against the new lords. 12th century, year 1177 AD. The Battle of Montgazard marked a turning point for the Crusader states, led by Baldwin IV, the Leper King, who was only 16 years old. The Christians faced Saladin's army. The victory was impressive, but not enough to stop the cycle of violence in the Holy Land. The conflict between Muslim forces and Crusaders would rage on for decades. Meanwhile, in the same year, the mighty Angkor Empire in Southeast Asia began to crumble. Internal strife and external attacks, especially from the Champa Empire, sparked a period of instability that would last for generations. Another tragic event of this century was the Aleppo earthquake in 1138 in Syria. An estimated 200,000 people died. Trade routes overland were devastated, forcing commerce to shift toward the seas, which boosted the rise of Italian cities like Venice. 13th century, year 1258 AD. The siege of Baghdad by the Mongol Empire delivered a devastating blow to the Islamic world. Baghdad, one of the most important cultural and scientific centers of its time, was destroyed. Hundreds of thousands were massacred, ending what became known as Islam's Golden Age. Libraries were burned, and centuries of accumulated knowledge vanished in flames. As if that weren't enough, the previous year, Mount Samalis in Indonesia erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in millennia. It launched vast amounts of sulfur into the atmosphere, triggering global cooling that was already noticeable by 1258, harsh winters, failed harvests, widespread famine, and global crisis. 14th century, year 1347 AD, one of humanity's darkest chapters began, the arrival of the Black Death, or bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas and through the air. The disease swept across the globe, killing about a third of Europe's population and an estimated 200 million people worldwide. The plague likely reached Europe during the siege of the city of Kaffa in Crimea, brought by infected soldiers of the Golden Horde. From there, rats carrying the disease boarded Genoese merchant ships, spreading terror across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Many saw the plague as divine punishment. Panic spread as fast as the disease. This horror came just after the Great Famine of 1315, caused by years of failed harvests. When the plague arrived, Europe was already weakened, and it collapsed even further. 15th century, year 1453 AD. A chapter closed. Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. The former capital of the Byzantine Empire, a bastion of Orthodox Christian culture and faith, was conquered after a long and brutal siege. Thousands were killed or enslaved. The empire that had endured for over 1,000 years was officially gone. The impact was deep. A wave of refugees fled the city, bringing books, knowledge, and traditions that would fuel the Renaissance in Western Europe. On the other hand, the fall of Constantinople also disrupted trade routes with the East, forcing European powers to seek new paths, which later sparked the Age of Exploration. That same year, the Ottomans tried to capture Belgrade but failed. Still, the conflict cost countless lives and scarred the entire region. 16th century, year 1520 AD. One of the most devastating events in the history of the Americas began quietly, but lethally. The arrival of smallpox. Brought by European explorers, the disease spread like wildfire among indigenous populations who had no immunity. In some regions, mortality rates reached 90%. Imagine entire villages vanishing. Civilizations in the Andes and North America were devastated. No empire suffered more than the Aztecs. Smallpox didn't just kill millions, it wiped out warriors, leaders, and healers who could have resisted the Spanish invasion. In no time, the combination of brutal European forces and an uncontrollable epidemic reduced one of the continent's greatest civilizations to ruins. 16th century, year 1644 AD. China plunged into one of its bloodiest periods. The Ming dynasty, already weakened by internal crises, was overthrown by a popular revolt in Beijing. But before the rebels could seize power, the Manchus stormed in, founding the Qing dynasty. The country became a battlefield. Millions died from war, persecution, and disasters. Making things worse, this happened during the height of the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling. Crop failures led to widespread famine. An estimated 25 million people died in China alone. Russia also faced disaster. A Peruvian volcano erupted, and the resulting climate collapse triggered the famine of 1601, killing around 2 million Russians. 18th century, year 1783 AD. India suffered a cruel blow. The El Niño phenomenon caused a devastating drought that sparked the Chalisa famine. Crops died, rivers dried up, millions starved. It was even worse because the region had already suffered food shortages the year before. That same year, Iceland was struck by the eruption of Mount Laki. The disaster didn't stay on the island. The volcano released toxic gases that spread across Europe, poisoning crops and killing thousands with respiratory illnesses. Half of Iceland's livestock died, and a quarter of the population perished from starvation and hydrofluoric acid poisoning. The toxic cloud reached the UK and France, where it also caused thousands of deaths. The aftermath disrupted monsoons in Africa and Asia, worsening food crises on multiple continents. Another key event was the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, a massive quake followed by tsunamis and fires that destroyed the Portuguese capital and killed up to 100,000 people. Meanwhile, in Central Asia, the Qing dynasty carried out one of the largest massacres in history by exterminating around 400,000 Jungar Mongols through war, starvation, and mass deportations. 19th century, year 1816 AD. The world fell into an apocalyptic climate event. Literally, it became known as the Year Without a Summer. It began the year before, when Indonesia's Mount Tambora erupted with colossal force, sending tons of ash and sulfur into the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked, triggering global cooling. Summer never came. It snowed in June, frost hit in July, rain wouldn't stop, crops failed. Famine spread like never before. In China, floods destroyed rice fields. In Europe, desperation drove people to eat sawdust, moss, and even stray animals. Riots broke out. Thousands migrated in search of food and shelter. It was a silent but cruel collapse. 20th century, year 1918 AD. The world, already exhausted by World War I, faced a new invisible enemy, the Spanish flu. Within months, this pandemic spread across every continent, killing around 50 million people. Many soldiers died before ever returning home. Hospitals overflowed. Cities collapsed. The following decade was also grim. In 1921, a devastating drought, combined with the chaos of the Russian Revolution and Civil War, caused mass starvation in the Soviet Union. Over 5 million died. Fast forward to 1942, World War II reached some of its darkest moments. The Wannsee Conference marked the beginning of the systematic Holocaust. Millions of Jews were hunted and murdered. The Battle of Stalingrad became a symbol of Soviet resistance, but cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Meanwhile, the Battle of Midway turned the tide in the Pacific, and Al Alamein marked the Allies' counteroffensive in Africa. At the same time, Japan committed atrocities like the Sook-Ching massacre in Singapore, where civilians were brutally executed. 21st century, year 2020. It felt like a disaster movie. The COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, claiming millions of lives, locking families indoors, and freezing entire economies. Quarantines, masks, collapsed hospitals. But the damage wasn't just physical. Loneliness, separation from loved ones, and constant fear had a deep psychological impact. Businesses went bankrupt, people lost jobs, inequality grew. At the same time, wildfires devastated Australia, California, and the Amazon. Millions of hectares turned to ash, with immeasurable human and environmental loss. Locust swarms ravaged crops in Africa. In the Middle East, record-breaking hurricanes and typhoons destroyed cities. Mass protests erupted in several countries. And if that weren't enough, the Beirut port explosion destroyed part of the Lebanese capital, leaving behind a warlike scene in the middle of urban life. So, in your opinion, which century was the most apocalyptic? Leave your thoughts in the comments.